Let's move to the most entertaining part. Here we can see Spirex already set up in a local environment, and we have several relevant core functionalities. Here it is important to understand that once we have Spirex installed, the first thing we need to do is run a wizard or setup for everything related to the skill manager, which is what I mentioned earlier regarding skills. From here, we can create a new client, client 1, and this client will inherit all the default skills of our agents, which are part of the orchestration we already have. If we have, let's say, a specific technology or documents, whether business functional or technical, that we can upload as context to the skill manager. That is very important because it can iterate again over these capability levels, so the agents can check whether they can solve the requirements for this type of technology. As a demo, I'm going to enter .NET 10 Bootstrap 4. We run the analysis. And here, Spirex should detect the skill gaps that the agents may have for this type of technology. Well, here, once the skill manager has been consulted about the technologies, it identified that indeed not all agents already have the skills required to develop. In this case, it identified that the designer, the developer, and the architect have skill gaps. Therefore, we can effectively select them whether one or two skills and generate those skills so that we automatically have them configured for that type of technology. This is an iterative process where it goes one by one generating and calling the LLM so that it generates a new skill for this type of tool. Okay, here it finished generating it for the developer agent. We can see the new lines associated with the technology that is injecting as inheritance into this new skill override for the developer agent. Now it is working on the designer agent. It has already finished. In fact, here it also gives it a rating, indicating whether it is actually a change with high impact or medium impact. Here it has it for the designer as well. It has already generated the new skills. And now it is moving on to the architect. Here it finishes, and we effectively now have a new skill configuration. Once we accept the changes, meaning we are going to override those skills for client 1 that we had entered here, we accept the changes, and what we are going to see is that our client 1, when viewing all the other overrides, shows the 3 changes we made. We can effectively go and review what the changes to these skills are, and what the skill override is for that agent. And if we wish, we can also edit these changes. This means that we have the setup to develop and define requirements with this agent structure and orchestration. Therefore, having the skills properly configured and tuned becomes very important, and the skill manager should be part of the main wizard and setup. An important point is that these already configured skills can be pushed to our source code repository, so they can also be shared in our central repository. Then we can move on to the features. Once we have finally completed this whole skill wizard or setup, we can move on to creating a new epic or feature. If we have existing project code, we can connect it to our Git so that it downloads it into our output folder, and then we can index it. This indexing is done at the file level at the project structure level. Therefore, it will be shared with the developer agent and the architect so that they know there is already existing code. So, if a new requirement needs to be developed, they could determine whether they need another base project, a separate project with an additional microservice, or basically develop the code within the same structure. If it is a new project, that is when we are talking about creating a new scaffolding. I'm going to enter an example epic here. Here we can also select which skill pack we need or want the agents to work with for this epic. I'm going to change it here. And this is optional. This is what I was mentioning about the team leader's evaluation of the agent skills. We can skip it if you already know effectively that transaction as well, and make the pipeline process a bit faster, but generally we'll leave it as default. We leave existing code selected and click Start the pipeline. We can also see our backlog. We're going to move to the backlog, and there we can see that the pipeline has started running. This is an important point because we're going to start iterating over what we have mentioned earlier, which is mainly the base orchestration of all these agents, including clarification flows if necessary. until finally, as these stories are approved, the process moves on to development. A very relevant point here is that the human will always have the final judgment to evaluate whether the generated story is correct, whether they can edit that story, or whether they actually want to discard it. Therefore, it is important that the human always has the final say, and not ultimately accepts the implementation over the code and over the previously established business requirement. We can see this in the backlog, where that execution is taking place. And we're going to speed up the pipeline a bit and see what these generated stories actually look like. This could be a pipeline that is practically complete, where it generated 13 user stories. Here we can see that it generates dependencies to effectively determine in what order those stories should be developed. This includes everything related to the story from the business perspective, the acceptance criteria, and also the more technical implementation tasks. Since all these stories are already in planning status by the developer, we can see that it also establishes a dependency tree for those stories. Therefore, even if we change the statuses of the stories that are lower down, it will not develop them because dependencies still exist. Finally, once the ones above are also configured and accepted by the user, it would begin carrying out this development in parallel. So, it is important that it generates this dependency tree in order to be ready and finally generate the functional code. Here, this is an example of when it detects skill gaps. In this case, it was for another requirement, and it found that the designer and the architect had deficiencies in their skills. Why is it important to see it in this view? Because here it happened the other way around. We did not run the initial skill manager wizard and went directly to injecting a requirement. And even so, it stopped the pilot and found the skill gaps. Here, what we should do is effectively make the corrections and relaunch it, meaning relaunch the pilot. Now, here this is important because this would already be a clarification flow. That is, here the TL detected that even so, the injected epic was not sufficient from a context perspective, so it needed to ask some questions. And these are the types of questions it generates. In this case, it generated around 7 questions, and once answered, we can continue. This is the one we just generated, which is still processing. We need to be clear that this is not an instant process. This is a process that can take minutes. It can easily take an hour, depending on your internet capacity. And something very relevant is the connection we have with the LLMs. I'm going to go back to the chart. This is because one of the main questions we have been asked is, but do you connect the Anthropic APIs? How many tokens are you spending? Well, in this case, since this is our local environment, as it says here, in the local console, what that means is that we use Cloud Code installed in our console. Through Spirex, it connects via proxy to the local console and can identify which LLM consoles we have enabled. We can see this directly in the configuration screen. So, ultimately, it connects through the proxy with our local consoles. Here, in the configuration screen, we can identify which LLMs are mainly available, and by default, we have Anthropic's Cloud Code configured, but we can also switch to OpenAI Codex. In fact, this icon is also updated here. Something important is that this panel will indicate which LLM we are working with by default and which client skills we are also working with by default. That is, once we want to inject a requirement, we can change it, but we know that by default the defined skill will effectively remain selected. So I'm going to keep Cloud Code here. What will this allow us to do? This, which is one of the questions we ask the most, means that here, although we have an approximate calculation of how many tokens we are using for each of our agents, an important point is that because we use the direct console subscription, all our teams, or all of those already included with the Spirex as a framework, also have Max Cloud Code subscription. Therefore, we will not directly consume tokens from the Anthropic API. It is not that Spirex does not allow it. In the configurations, we also have the possibility of setting it up directly with the Anthropic API. But we avoid it for everything that has development, so it focuses heavily on the limits we have within that subscription. We can even use a $25 subscription, but we may not finish the project and would have to wait several days to complete it. So our entire team comes with a Spirex Plus and a Max Cloud Code subscription. And now, to start wrapping up, here we also have everything related to the epics being generated from the backlog, as well as the statistical level, what status they are in, which agents have been running, and whether any are pending approval. With an additional control panel showing what the agent's inputs and outputs were. We also have agent telemetry, their latency, their success rate, and whether anything has failed for some reason. And also here, at the calculation level, it remains approximate because, effectively, with each developer subscription, with a personal subscription, the number of tokens is already limited by the LLM engine itself. We also have communications with the MCPs. Here, we have the possibility of connecting with Figma, with Sonar, either with Bitbucket or GitHub, and effectively with Jira. This can continue to scale, allowing us to have more MCPs to keep enriching it so that it effectively has more context to develop better, as well as more tools to interact effectively with our client's ecosystem. And finally, a documentation layer where we can effectively understand a little more about the framework. And this is Spirex, our software development lifecycle accelerator based on AI agents.